From BBC Learning English, this is Learning English from the News, our podcast about the news headlines.
In this programme, leaders gather for COP30 climate talks. But will this help fight climate change?
Hello, I'm Beth.
And I'm Pippa.
In this programme, we look at one big news story and the vocabulary in the headlines that will help you understand it.
You can find all the vocabulary and headlines from this episode, as well as a worksheet on our website, bbclearningenglish.com.
So, COP30. Let's hear more about this story.
2 weeks of international climate talks began this week in Belém in Brazil, on the edge of the Amazon rainforest.
Now, COP is a gathering of politicians and negotiators from around the world to discuss climate change and make agreements to help deal with the problem. The talks usually happen every year.
In a speech on the first day of the talks, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva warned about the dangers of fake news and climate deniers. These are people who incorrectly argue that human-caused climate change is not real.
On Tuesday, protesters broke into the COP30 venue holding signs that said, "Our forests are not for sale."
Let's have our first headline. This one's from The Guardian, a newspaper in the UK. Who are the major players at COP30 and what do they want?
And that headline again, who are the major players at COP30 and what do they want? And that's from The Guardian in the UK.
This headline is from an article which gives some background information about the COP30 talks.
Now, we're interested in the phrase major players. Pippa, what does that mean?
Well, a major player is a person or organisation who is important and possibly powerful within a situation.
So let's think about this story. COP30 is a big conference. There are lots of countries who want to make agreements and they all have different priorities. This article says it will tell readers about the major players, so that is the most important countries who are attending the talks.
That's right. It's common for news articles to use the phrase major players to refer to people in any complicated situation where there are a lot of different sides to pay attention to. For example, in tense and complex political negotiations.
Now, another situation where we might use the phrase major players is in business. If a business is a major player, then it's important and successful in that industry. So, for example, YouTube, Instagram and TikTok are all major players in social media.
We've had major player, important person or organisation within a particular situation.
For example, the mayor hopes to become a major player in negotiations about a new railway. This is Learning English from the News, our podcast about the news headlines. Today, we're talking about COP30, the climate talks happening in Brazil.
Leaders and government officials have gathered near the Amazon rainforest for a summit, that's a series of talks, about climate change.
But some important people have decided not to attend. US President Donald Trump has criticised green policies and is not participating in the conference. The US government is also not sending any high-level representatives.
Other leaders of powerful countries, such as China's President Xi Jinping, are also not attending, although China has sent other officials to the summit.
Some experts think that because some powerful leaders aren't attending the talks, they won't make any progress, although others believe the negotiations are still very important for fighting climate change.
Let's have our next headline. This is from BBC News. COP30, Trump and many leaders are skipping it. So does the summit still have a point?
And that headline again, COP30, Trump and many leaders are skipping it. So does the summit still have a point? And that's from BBC News.
This headline is about Trump and some other leaders skipping COP30 talks. If you skip an event, you don't attend it. But the headline asks, does the summit still have a point?
OK, Pippa, so what does a point mean here?
Well, point is a word that can have a lot of different meanings in different contexts, but here it means purpose or meaning.
Right, the headline is asking, does the summit still have a point? In other words, do the COP30 talks still have a purpose? Are they going to achieve anything?
And we can also use point if a situation feels like it doesn't have a purpose or won't achieve anything. We can say it doesn't have a point or describe it as pointless.
We've had point, purpose or meaning.
For example, I don't see the point in ironing my clothes. They'll only get creased again. This is Learning English from the News from BBC Learning English. We're talking about the climate discussions at COP30 in Brazil.
This year's COP gathering began on Monday and talks will continue for 2 weeks.
As well as government representatives, businesses also attend COP events to discuss possible ideas to prevent the effects of climate change.
OK, so let's have another headline. This one comes from the Financial Times. Muted global business turnout at COP30 reflects subdued mood.
That headline again, muted global business turnout at COP30 reflects subdued mood. And that's from the newspaper, the Financial Times.
OK, so this headline describes the mood at the conference as subdued. Subdued means not as happy or loud as usual.
But we're interested in the word muted. Can you tell us more, Beth?
Yes, well, like with subdued, muted is to do with noise or how loud something is. Now, literally, if something is muted, it means it's not loud or it's silent.
Yes, but the headline is using muted metaphorically, and it just means people are not very enthusiastic or excited.
Right. The headline describes a muted global business turnout. Turnout refers to the number of people who attend an event. So a muted business turnout means not that many businesses are attending, or that those who are attending aren't that enthusiastic about the event.
This is another headline that is talking about the concerns that the COP summit might not be effective in reaching agreements to tackle climate change. But as we mentioned, some experts think the event is still very important.
OK, so a turnout can be muted. What other things do we often hear described as muted, Pippa?
Well, we might hear the phrase a muted response, meaning people aren't that excited about something, or returning to that idea of sound, if at the end of a speech there is a muted applause from the audience, there's not very much applause. People aren't that excited.
We've had muted, not very enthusiastic or excited.
For example, the CEO's new ideas received a muted response from staff at the company meeting.
That's it for this episode of Learning English from the News. We'll be back next week with another news story.
If you've enjoyed this programme, try our Learning English Grammar podcast to improve your English grammar. It's on our website, bbclearningenglish.com.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. Search BBC Learning English. Goodbye for now.
Bye.